welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn, joined as always by James and Alan. I'd like to say congratulations to Celtic, the treble winners. That's the copy from the other week. No, we did not win the Scottish Cup. We lost to Aberdeen. Everybody listening to this will obviously know that. What you're here to listen to is hopefully a pretty rational take, my opinion aside, on what happened in that cup final. I've got to ask you how you are. First of all, Alan, I'll come to you first. How are you in the aftermath of such a devastating defeat?
Yeah, a little bit harassed, just for various reasons. Data backup and recovery issues, and rushing to get things done before I go away next week. So I'm just a bit harassed at the moment. But I'm over the game. I was kind of miserable at the time, but I'm kind of over it now. So, listen. Well done to Aberdeen. That has to be said. I think something as well, especially about a one club city that it's something that galvanizes a whole town, a whole city. It's an incredibly memorable day for those supporters and for the whole city, as it were. Disappointing for Celtic. We'll get into the game, but we do have to say well done to them, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you wouldn't be winding up Rangers and doing your job properly if you didn't say congratulations to the Dons. I do enjoy that. But James, how are you?
I'm good. I echo well done, Aberdeen. Congratulations to our friend Gavin, who joins us, AFC 1903. He's helped us preview and review and analyze Aberdeen all season. So, yeah, congratulations, Gavin. And to all the Dons fans, I mean, I can imagine the first one in quite some time for them. So we'll get into it. It was quite the game.
We will get into I'd like to say a special well done and congratulations to the guys over at the Red Tinted Glasses podcast. That's a particularly good Aberdeen podcast that I like listening to, and they're a nice bunch of guys over there. So I hope they've been enjoying their weekend. This is maybe a bit of an entitled thing to say, but being a supporter of a club that wins as many trophies as we do, seeing Crystal Palace win the FA Cup, seeing Aberdeen win the Scottish Cup, seeing this spread of trophies, although I want Celtic to win everything they go into, I'm not totally against seeing fans of clubs who very rarely get the chance to celebrate getting it once in a while. I would just hope it wouldn't be at our expense at the end of a penalty shootout. That's a particularly bitter way to lose it. But Alan, I'll come to you first. There has been a lot of chat around the game. Some of it, for my take, a little bit hyperbolic, and I understand I am fully the pot calling the kettle black there. But what was your opinion on not only the game itself and what you observed, but the talk around it since it's happened?
Yeah, I think. Listen, I'll flag up the risks here going forward for the rest of the chat. One of which will be sort of back projecting things based on what actually happened, rather than what we're thinking before the game. Second is, you mentioned sort of being entitled. So we do spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about the financial side of the game. About the dynamics of football in general. We look at things like ELO ratings for teams and try and assess their relative strengths across leagues, try to put into context different clubs in different situations in Europe, etc., assessing strength of teams and what have you, hopefully to try to do that in as rational a way as we can. Celtic should win these games because of Celtic have got an overwhelming financial and resource advantage over every other club in the league, and especially and Aberdeen in particular. So it is disappointing, but it also puts you in an invidious situation. It's almost like if you don't win a treble, is that like a disaster? I mean, that does sound so entitled, but if you look at the resource picture, it's kind of what you'd expect from an odds basis. And I'm sure the bookies were reflecting that before the game. But this is why we love football above all else, because it does allow for far more shocks, if you like, or unexpected outcomes apropos the odds than probably any other sport. So and that's great. That we should be grateful for that. We can all think of great finals, and it would be So we have to be careful, I think, in terms of there's a few pitfalls herein as far as the analysis goes. But I suppose I was most taken aback by a prevailing narrative that I'm going to oversimplify it, but it's just how it's kind of occurred to me. There's obviously a lot of negativity from Celtic fans about various individual performances, but also probably Brendan Rodgers. Probably on the Aberdeen side, there's going to be some sort of minor deification of Jimmy Tulane, and I'm not sure I agree with that either. So, we're going to try and navigate our way through a lot of these sort of things, because at the end of the day, I'm happy to sit here if Celtic have been outplayed or outthought. I'm happy to, as we did go into huge detail in Dortmund about Dortmund, for example, how we've been quite open and honest about how Celtic have been second best in many aspects of derby matches, for example. I'm not buying it for this game, though. And that's not to take away from Aberdeen. As I said at the beginning, congratulations to them. But this wasn't one of those occasions. This wasn't one of these, Celtic were outplayed. Celtic were second best on the day. By most metrics in the game, Celtic pretty much dominated the match and should have won it. It really should have won it. But a cup tie, things go wrong, moments, how many mistakes has Schmeichel made of that magnitude this season? I can't think of another one. When your 33 goal striker goes through one-on-one with a goalkeeper, how many times has he missed this season? He's probably missed a couple, but he missed the big one when it really mattered. Did we expect that? Yeah, probably not. So this is what happens in cup finals, and these big moments do matter. But in terms of some of the narratives, hopefully we'll try and look at some of the facts and the data and the performance analysis to kind of navigate our way through some of those.
You're on mute, Laura. Oh boy. We're not ready for a cup final, Laura. Where's your mentality? Where's your hunger?
Yeah.
Some would say that was a massive
Rogers is waving for you to come on, Laura, about 5 minutes ago, and you were chewing your gum looking at the crowd.
Honestly, I've so pride myself on not accidentally talking on mute because I really value what I say. So I want people to hear it, even if it's absolute nonsense. But yeah, unfortunately for the listeners, James has reminded me to unmute my microphone, and so you can hear me again. James, before we get into the more nitty gritty aspects of the review and what Alan was talking about there, another general narrative that I've seen coming up is the fact that it was a case of Celtic didn't turn up and Celtic aren't motivated because we've won so much, and that because these players are used to winning, then they've got no motivation to see it through. Now, I think that's wrong. Apart from anything else, a lot of these players are still in their first season at Celtic and haven't won nearly the amount of things that people think they have just because they're Celtic players. Like the turnover in players and things like that is always a factor that I think you need to get right when you're considering these things. But what's your opinions on that? Was it a simple case of we didn't turn up, or was it, as it normally is, a little bit more complex than that?
I think in this instance it's a lot more complex. I think there's, obviously it's all speculation, but I think there's a reasonable scenario where there could have been, and we talked about it in our preview, we've been talking about the last couple of weeks looking towards this game, was the potential for, and we always talk about fine margins and how just, a fraction of 1% type of conceptual difference in intensity can make a big, can be a big deal, especially if your opponents are playing with their hair on fire because this is their biggest game by far, by some distance of the season. So I'm not saying this is true, but I'm saying it would be reasonable. We thought about it ahead of time that the team could be a bit overconfident. I wouldn't even call it complacent. I would say, we've kicked these guys' asses the last, 4 times we played them. And in the time that we drew, we could have beat them 7-2 with a different scenario on a different day. So could that breed a little bit of overconfidence? I think that would maybe be human. That wouldn't be surprising. And I'm not suggesting that on the case of the management team or the manager or the coaching staff. It's just, I think for players, it's kind of, when you've had it as easy as we have against, on a relative basis against Aberdeen, prior to this game, I think that could be a component. I don't buy into the, not putting forth effort or intensity, like from a professionalism perspective. I just don't agree with that. I think that can happen in dead rubbers. I think we did see that in some of the games after Bayern Munich as we kind of played out the stretch. And we talked about it at the time. Like, I think that's a reasonable expectation. And there's we've talked about it. We've written pieces about looking at some of the ratcheting down of performance numbers once the league's effectively tied up. And it's been a pattern of that every season that we've won the league. There was a pattern of that the one season that Rangers won the league, right? They kind of, crapped it once they officially, clinched the league. So all these things are normal human responses. As Roger said, I think before the game, or maybe it was after, they're not robots. So I don't ascribe to that narrative or the turning up thing. Well, my view from 30,000 feet always is that if one team looks like they didn't turn up, and the other team looks like they did on a relative basis, usually there's something fundamentally tactical that is different, or that we talked about this with Dortmund. Like, it's not that our players didn't turn up. There was a tactical issue in that game where we left acres of space in transition against a team that you do not do that against, particularly with the team of our level. And we got absolutely pounded because of it, right? That wasn't because the players weren't trying hard. It was because of a major tactical issue. So I think the issue here was more so Aberdeen dropped a surprise. And, we talked about it in our preview with Gavin. There was a consensus, I think, amongst us and Gavin that probably playing some form of a mid to lower block defensive, kind of zonal, maybe a little bit of man marking, but more positionally, not man marking in the defensive third like some teams have tried to do when they park the bus, was, Gavin even said a 5-3-2 is what he would want to see. But he didn't expect it because they hadn't played it all season, right? So the idea that Celtic prepared for something other than what came about, I think, is not only likely, but to be expected. Why, if you're Rodgers, why would you prepare for something that they haven't played all year as your primary kind of like base case as far as your tactical setup? So I think, and then how we responded to that once the selection came out and the game began to unfold and became clear that's how they were going to play, that's a separate conversation. But I think those two factors are far more impactful, as opposed to, players not turning up.
I'm going to come back to you on that separate conversation because I really want to get your thoughts on that. I have some of my own, but we'll come back to that in a second. Alan, I want to get your opinion on some of the more nuanced parts of the data, because anybody who does like the base review of the data will see that, as you would expect, Celtic were ahead on possession, shots, corners, that kind of thing. That's all very basic stuff, obviously. What were you observing throughout the game in terms of Celtic's performance that may or may not have led to the result that we ended up seeing?
So I think to the point of, addressing this, they didn't want it enough, they didn't care. I agree. I think that's complete nonsense. My opinion is the game was so comfortable for Celtic that, if anything, the players felt, well, if we grind this out and win 1-0, so be it. We'll take it, because there was so little jeopardy or threat to Celtic in the game. There was virtually, there was a Palaversa shot from some stupid distance that actually came from a pass after a throw-in. So is that a set-piece pass? I don't know. They didn't have a shot from open play until the 113th minute. Any jeopardy to Celtic's goal was from set pieces, of which there were probably two that were a bit a bit dodgy. Nesbitt had a header from inside the 6-yard box, and that's never good. And then there was
just to jump in there, Alan. Then, from a statistical point of view, then I presume the shot that ended, or the ball that ended up going in off of Kasper Schmeichel, that wasn't statistically recorded as a shot.
It's not a shot, no XG associated with it at all, because it's a cross, which Schmeichel's deflected into his own net. There was, and Celtic's goal was also similarly an own goal, obviously, but Celtic got the break. And I disagree with James a little bit. I don't think this was a case of one team set up, shocked how the other lot have turned up. I mean, yes, it was a surprise. Gavin said that's what he would like to see, and wisely so. And lo and behold, they did it, and they didn't run around pressing Celtic. So the first their pressing numbers, that the Celtic's passes completed for defensive action was just about 7.5 in the 2-2 game the first time we played Tullin's team. It was double that. It was like over 13 in this match, which is an indicator that Aberdeen were very passive. Not passive, but they were content to let Celtic have the ball in front of them. So this was very, and we said Aberdeen's major feature under Tullin was pressing, and actually this was the thing which had given his team most problems playing Celtic, because they wanted to press Celtic. And although they'd got some encouragement, especially in that 2-2 game where they got a couple of quick breaks, they scored one. Sockler, McGrath put through a couple of good balls in the first half. They got convinced that this was the right way to go, and then got absolutely dismantled in the League Cup semi-final. And then it's taken them another 3 games for Tullin to learn not to do that. He got there in the end, so we give him some credit. But Celtic playing up against a back five. Whoopie-doo. How many league games have Celtic played up against a back five? Many, many, many times. This isn't some voodoo that was put up on the field that Celtic haven't seen before and couldn't unpick. So I'm not buying that, and I'm not buying that Aberdeen were set up particularly coherent. Aberdeen were objectively terrible in the first half with the ball. They just gave it away time and time again. They didn't have a single shot. They didn't have a single touch in the box. Right? Now, you might say, well, okay, they're staying in the game, they're being competitive, and I agree with all that. So they were good in their shape. But I mean, to be honest with you, a third division team could have performed exactly the same way, being good in their shape, run about a lot, close down the spaces, stopped you getting anywhere near the box, etc. Got their head on the end of any crosses that came in. Any professional football team should be able to do that. What to me would be a great performance from Aberdeen, or anybody playing Celtic in this situation, would be to defend well, but also to carry that threat. Could they make even advantage of long throws or corners? Now, eventually, as I say, nearly all their chances, bar one, at the very end of the game, came from set pieces. So they created nothing from open play at all, really. And they leave Morris on the bench until, was it gone the 80th minute, something like that? And Guy, that made no sense to me. These two are clearly the two players that are going to cause Celtic some problems at least. Even if, which is what they reverted to in the 5-1 game at Pittodrie recently, they only have one attacking idea, which is launch the ball over the top at Morris on the right wing and let him chase it. That literally was their only idea. Okay, even if they'd done that more, I would have said, well, okay, at least they've got one idea. But they virtually didn't have any. So I'm not buying this with some tactical genius from Aberdeen. And in fact, what is fascinating to me is I was desperately wanting Jimmy Tullin to succeed, wanted to see him build something at Aberdeen, make the league stronger, them being competitive. I was all in for that. I've kind of, as the season's gone on, matches against Celtic, the way that the team's kind of almost disintegrated, the form has been poor. They're nearer bottom four than they are a top six team. If you look at underlying numbers, as I said, all season. I think they've got exactly the same conversation at Aberdeen as Tottenham have got about Ange, and that Manchester United had about Ten Hag, which is, does one cup win make him a winner? Therefore, we keep him and we throw more money at him, or do you look at the underlying performance and go, well, we pulled that off, but let's actually look at the underlying performance data, and is that telling us the true story, or do we all get behind the sort of the birthday card notion that he's a winner because he's won this match? Well, you know my answer to that, right? So let's not make this something that it wasn't. Okay, I'm not saying that Celtic played well. I'm not saying that Aberdeen ultimately didn't deserve their win at some level, that's fine. But it isn't some tactical masterclass. It wasn't some genius move. Celtic played as if they were quite happy to win 1-0 because all the evidence of what was unfolding on the pitch was that would have been enough. They didn't need to chase the game. They didn't need to be running all over the place. I'm not saying Rodgers didn't make mistakes. We'll come to the substitutions because I think that was and I'm back projecting here, but I think in retrospect, that was a massive. I got behind it when it happened, but as it turned out, it was a bit of a misstep. Not a massive misstep, but a little bit of a misstep. So we can get into all that. I'm not forgiving everything on Rodgers in terms of he didn't play a perfect game. He didn't get things wrong. Of course he did. But what I'm not having is any narrative that Celtic was some kind of masterclass tactically, that Celtic fell into a trap. Aberdeen were objectively awful for most of the game and really only came to life when they were gifted an equaliser with the first serious mistake that Kasper Schmeichel's made all season.
I want to first of all just say well done, Alan, for not using the word pish when you said birthday card notion. That was very well controlled of you. That was very well controlled of you, and I say congratulations to you on that, because that phrase just falls out of my mouth occasionally. So I think changing the word to notion at short notice was excellent there. James, I'm going to say this, and I know Alan qualified everything he said there by saying he didn't think Rodgers was blameless. There's problems with the substitutions that we'll get into. There's certainly other things that he could have done. But we were having a discussion before the recording started, and I liked, or we were talking about when it was clear that Aberdeen were maybe set up a slightly different way, that Rodgers could have been more proactive in that initial stage. I certainly think he could have been. What did you see during the game that maybe he could have done, even if, as Alan says, maybe in general we saw a situation where we thought 1-0 would be enough?
Yeah, so I'll answer that momentarily. I wanted to rebut something Alan said, only because I have a different kind of framing of it. I don't think I necessarily disagree with him. It's more of a framing. So I agree.
It's going to get tasty.
Well, no, I don't think it was a tactical masterclass in any way on an absolute basis. But given the expectation of what Thelin was likely to do, I do give him credit on a relative basis. I'll be a little crass in saying he had, and maybe a child of the 80s, dating myself. So apologies in advance. I know what I'm about to say is inappropriate, but he had big balls to be able to make this decision. Okay. That to go into a cup final, which with his job may be on the line if he gets this wrong and they get destroyed. Okay. For him to go completely off script of what he's done all season. And it seems like it does look like the way that they execute
in a final as well.
In a final against, by some distance, the best team in the country, who has kicked their ass big time, pretty much on a performance basis, every single game leading into it. Thelein's not XG illiterate, right? So he's got some, modernity to himself as far as being a younger manager. And so for him to have made all of these decisions, now we talked about this with Gavin leading into it. Alan and I were like, why the hell wouldn't you start Papagueye and or Morris, because they are the threats against Celtic? And Gavin was like, no, he's going to start Keskinen. Right? It's just for whatever reason, like defensive, whatever. Like it was. So I'm not absolving Thelin and saying that he was a genius.
By the way, Keskinen 0 expected scoring contribution, 0 packing score. He did apart from run around and press and do a bit of pressing, he did nothing.
Yeah, not exactly right. So I didn't expect much from him. I mean, that was why we were talking about it would be crazy to play him over those other players. In our view, anyway, was when they right out of the gate in the beginning of the game. So I saw how they were setting up. We were discussing it in the huddlebreakdown.com chat room. It was like, Gavin was nice enough to clarify that it was pretty clear it was going to be 5-3-2 based off of the team sheet that came out. Oh, that's interesting. Like that made news like that ahead of the game. the team sheets are out, but you kind of know how they're going to play. They're not going to be front-footed aggressive in high pressing, most likely, if they're set up with three center backs. And,
would Rodgers have got that team sheet at the same time?
I mean, I can't imagine they wouldn't know that. I mean, if us idiots like us
sure
are trolling Twitter, I would think the coaching staff would get a hold of that quick.
But James, my major point here was that, and this is, and let's talk about Ange Postecoglou at Tottenham. This is exactly the same conversation.
And I agree with that.
In Ange's case, you've spent 2 years saying you're going to play this very aggressive, attacking, high pressing football.
Yeah.
And we nearly got relegated, bottom of the league. No Tottenham manager has lost as many league games, but you won a trophy, therefore you're a winner. But you did it playing a style of football you've never been building the team towards. And it's the same with Jimmy Tilly. Jimmy Tilly has been building this team for a year to play high pressing, direct football. And fair play to him, he's watched his team get beat 6-5 by Celtic, and finally changes it, and then they get over the line in penalties. But that's not the style of football he's been spending a year curating, buying players, and saying this is my methodology. This is what we're building. So where does that leave? Where does that leave the football club? Where does that leave the football club?
Right. So I agree with all of that, but I'm also a persistent critic on football as a religion. In that this is the way I play.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Regardless of who the opponent is. So
if he was going to be a pragmatist, he would be like, is it Kettlewell? You change your lineup every game, change your shape every game, right? But he doesn't do that. He's played the same shape every game apart from one. So does this prove that he's a pragmatist?
No,
really,
and that's yet to be determined. 100%. I'm in agreement with that. So the plaudits I'm giving are purely on this one game. In what was a huge game, potentially the biggest game of his career. Maybe it was because of desperation. Maybe, who knows? Maybe it won't persist. But I think the fact that he had the balls to come out and play 5-3-2 and to basically sit off and set up like St. Mirren basically did to a large degree. To me, I think that's commendable, even if it's a one-off. Like I give Ange credit for having done it to win the freaking trophy. Like that's the goal here. It's not to say that I can, die on my cross.
Well, just
because I played the way I'm supposed to.
Just to pick you up on that, though, James. Like, I'm a total disciple of Ange Postecoglou. I'm thoroughly bought into the way he wants to play football. I will defend him to the hilt against anybody who says that he should change the way that he plays, because I loved that he was that dedicated to the way that he wanted to play. But in one game, he has completely thrown out the window any credibility he has with saying that that's how you should play the game, because he's just proved that what everybody has been telling him to do for the last 2 years worked. He's getting, to me, for everybody saying Ange Postecoglou should be allowed to stay because he's won this trophy, and even Tottenham fans who I've spoken to, Flav, who I was on his podcast a while ago, they're all changing their minds on the basis of one game and one outcome of one game. Even though...
Because, Laura, he's a winner.
Yes. Even though...
It's one penalty kick or one fluky deflection. He's a winner.
Even though he completely went against... He went completely against everything that he's ever talked about, that he's argued for numerous times, even when it's been obvious in games in the Premier League that he should have changed up what he was doing, and he's gone against what Tottenham as a club are known for in terms of their playing style. It just, the whole situation completely has made me realise how blinded football fans are by trophies. They will not care how you play if you're standing with the trophy at the end.
And it's a matter of framing for me, in that I'm not an ideologue when it comes to playing strategy. I'm more pragmatic. You can have core principles and philosophical preferences, but there's a kind of a scatter plot of how effective some things are against different opponents, and based off of their strengths, weaknesses, resources. I mean, for us to go into the Bernabeu and treat them under Ange the same way as we do going into, Aberdeen at Pittodrie is insanity, right? That to me is reductive stupidity. That's the worst implementation of an ideology. It's just naive, stupid. So that criticism of Ange, I actually have agreed with. This is why I argued that if he kept up the way he was going, it didn't matter how well we recruited. We were never going to be able to scale up the way he wanted to play in the Champions League. It was just not going to happen.
We were never going to get players good enough to do that.
No, not to be able to do it at a level that was going to be required. So I cheer people walking back from being a radical if it's a stupidity of being a radical, right? So I'm not saying that's what happened with Ange. Maybe he'll go right back to where he was. This is a one-off. I joked in framing it was his ego won out over his religion, right? So, I don't take Thielen to be as much of an ideologue as Ange, because Ange is kind of way out there on the spectrum, at least rhetorically, and the way he's behaved in the past. But maybe this is the beginning of them or him switching to more of a reasonable adjusting of strategy based on opposition. I hope for their sake going into Europe, if they make it into the Europa League, for example, that they learn some lessons. And, you're not going to go toe to toe with, one of the top 5 league teams that comes down into Patadri and say, oh yeah, we're going to have a go because we're at home. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it might be Aston Villa, maybe. I don't, you can imagine them going toe to toe with Aston Villa at Patadri next season. That would be completely nuts. But that's how a lot of people in football behave. So I give credit for them walking back from the abyss, so to speak. But there's a lot of credit. Like, I agree. They didn't play particularly well. I don't think we played particularly well. My criticism of Rodgers is not so much, and I know Alan and I disagree on this to a degree. I'm more an extremist on this front, which is, and it's a pet peeve, so maybe it's just that being realized here as an example, is it drives me nuts that football managers do not make substitutions early when they realize that it had been a better selection had they made an alternative selection, right? So I think it's reasonable that Rodgers set up, assuming that Aberdeen was going to play kind of normal relative to how they've played all season. Okay. I wouldn't expected him or the coaching staff to game plan, assuming and doing their selection that they're going to play like St. Mirren did the week before. I that would be unreasonable to expect our people to think that was what was going to happen. But then when that is what happens, I personally think that you make a substitution as soon as you realize that. If you think, especially with 5 subs, when you think that there's a better, and from what Rodgers said heading into the game, I think he thought there was a better team to play if it was going to be a park the bus version of Aberdeen. So why not make the substitution or substitutions early when you realize that that's not how they're going to set up? So that's my...
I would agree with that if the scenario had been that the way Aberdeen set up meant that suddenly Celtic were on the back foot, the balls were flying into the box, Schmeichel was running all over the place. We were getting overrun in midfield, we're getting outnumbered.
Yeah.
There was all that. But
this is where we disagree, Alan.
Celtic were in complete control of the game. They
weren't.
I know they weren't.
They weren't
in complete control.
So this is my vision.
There was no jeopardy to Celtic's goal at all. So as a manager, it's not like you've got a roster of 50 players. You can keep continually every play swapping players around. You've only got 5 subs. So you generally won't make subs if you at least have got control of the game. You'll wait and see, can we nick a goal? And guess what, we did. Right? It was ugly. It was horrible. There was no merit to it, and from a Celtic build-up perspective. But nevertheless, that completely changes the dynamic of the game. Utterly changes the dynamic of it. And then after half-time, we were still in control of the game. My criticism of Rodgers is he made his substitutions too early. He actually destroyed. He actually took away, to an extent, control of the game from Celtic. And in the event that Aberdeen would score, we didn't then have the tools on the pitch that were good enough to actually turn the game back in our favour again. Now that's a bit of hindsight. That is hindsight. I'll accept that.
So I just fundamentally disagree, agreeably as always. But I think that I don't think of us having possession, comfortable possession, which I agree with you. I think that was their game plan. They were passive. They were parking the bus in a passive way and daring us to create chances. because reasonably, they didn't think we could do it. And we couldn't. I mean, if we would just kept playing the way that we did with the same personnel, in static, this is obviously theoretical. We could have played for 3 days. And I'm not sure that we're going to create a clear chance with our personnel against that block the way that they were set up. It's not easy to do. Generally, an organized defense that's well coached and disciplined, which they were, and to your point, that could be a third division team that does that. Okay. It's never easy to break that kind of team down. Our personnel, in my opinion, particularly the ones that were available for selection and that the ones that the manager did select, are not good at that. I mean, we talk about toxic combination.
But the facts are we did. The facts are we did. The facts are we did.
Not the first hour.
I accept it's over 120 minutes, but 2.35 xG to 0.6 over 1.7 xG advantage. Celtic probably should have won that game by 2 goals.
Most of that was in extra time.
Yeah.
In regular time, it was well within our danger zone of we were kind of around 1 and they were kind of, well within 1. So, their game plan, this is where I don't think we had control. Because in my mind...
in 90 minutes, it was 2.02 to 0.33 after 90 minutes.
Yeah, I'd have to see what your individual values are on that, because that seems way high from what I looked at. But, I mean, Ida's was Maeda's was the...
Maeda was the big one, yeah.
The big ones, yeah.
It was one big chance in the game, yeah.
Right. But, so... The issue is, in my idea of control, is who was happier the way the game went in regular time. To me, like whose tactical plan was being implemented and actually, like, I don't think, and I agree.
Well, the team that's 1-0 up, who's got no jeopardy against their goal. That's the team that's happier.
I don't agree with that. I mean, if you're Aberdeen, if you have a shot. I disagreed with part of it, right? I disagree with how Rodgers ended up responding to this. But his game plan was to keep it close enough so that he could bring on Morris and Gouillet and get into extra time and then hopefully to penalties. Like this seemed to be the clear plan that they had. They were either playing for a 0-0, or if they did concede a goal, they'd bring on the attacking players to get it back. And outside of that chance to Maeda, we didn't really create anything else that I would consider a good chance. No, that's because they were set up to nullify the things that we get good chances from. Just transition.
There'll be 20 cup finals around Europe that were 1-0 in exactly the way that Celtic should have seen that game out. That's just the way these games go.
I get that, but now the alternate
that's a huge gamble. That's a huge gamble and it didn't pay off because they didn't create a single chance from open play until the 113th minute.
Right. So this is where I'll disagree a bit. So if you follow the logic of what their plan was, I mean, obviously they didn't know that Schmeichel was going to throw the ball into the net. So they had really in the last couple of minutes prior to that started to kick on to get front-footed. So had they not scored there, they were going to swarm on and try to score. I mean, it wasn't like they were going to bunker and play, for the last second to try and get some. So the idea that they only created that one chance, it happened to be a lucky goal, yes, but over the next 20, 25 minutes, had that not occurred, they would have been going front foot on us big time. They would have tried to score. And I mean, based on the way we were playing and who was on the pitch at that point, am I hugely confident that they wouldn't have scored or created at least some more good chances over that next 20, 25 minutes? I'm not. So again, I think from we always talk about game state. I think his decisions, given his game plan, and I think, I'm some of this is confirmation bias because this was the plan I thought they should have put in. I disagreed on selection, but they needed to get within the last half hour having a chance to win the game and or get into extra time. Like if you're Aberdeen, given the shit show that the rest of the season has been against Celtic, that is a home run. Like that's a tremendous outcome for you, I think.
So So I can agree that both Tulane might have been happy that he's got to the last 5-10 minutes and they're only one down, but also that Rodgers is comfortable that we've got such control of the game that barring individual errors, we are comfortably going to see this out as a 1-0 win. I think both of these things could be true.
I agree that they could both think that. I disagree with the premise that Celtic were going to be comfortable, because Tulene's plan was, I think, quite obvious that they were going to push for a goal in the last 20, 25 minutes. So,
I hate to jump in here with a football cliche, but I do agree that 1-0 is never a comfortable scoreline. And that's for a reason. But Alan, I guess having listened to you guys go back and forth, I'm somewhat in the middle in terms of what I believe and what I agree with from both of you. I think James is right. You can be 1-0 down and be happier with the way the game is going because it's not 3-0 or 4-0. You have kept Celtic within touching distance, and all you need is that little chance, which they got. And okay, Casper threw the ball into the net, but they got the chance. And then the closer they get to penalties, the more chance they have of winning the trophy, as it turned out. The question I would put to you, Alan, then is, what did we do wrong in that last 20 minutes? Or what would you have done differently for us to have maintained that 1-0 lead that in your opinion, Rodgers was quite happy to go with to see out the victory?
Yeah, I mean, most of even the smidgen of chances which they had, and they didn't have many, came from errors. I mean, Bernardo had actually been one of their better performers, and then suddenly in the last 10 minutes of the game, he has like 4 quite bad errors in a row. Two in attacking areas where he put a free kick out of play, which is a crime, and he had time and space to measure up a really good cross across goal, which he butchered and hit it straight to the goalkeeper, and then he gave the ball away a couple of times in our own defensive third. Up to that point, he'd actually been one of the better players on the pitch. He'd actually taken out more defenders. His passing was even very good. He was the one that was actually he had the most passes of anyone in the game for Celtic during the most part of that second half. As in, he was if you wanted to say someone was controlling the game, it was more him than MacGregor, actually. So, not recognising that he was tiring, maybe that was an error. But the damning indictment on Celtic is that, the team that we finished the game on trying to win a cup final with Johnny Kenny as a striker, bless him, Maeda still on the left, Yang, who I think almost collapsed in front of our eyes, his confidence just evaporated before us as a footballer. And then Greg Taylor is one of the midfield fulcrums. That is the damning indictment of Celtic. That is what we've ended up with. That is, I mean, some of those players in that respect, may not be good enough. We compared the 2016-17 final lineups. Had a bit of fun with that, didn't we? Before the in the preview show. Some of the players who ended up on the pitch, I don't think are good enough for Aberdeen. Aberdeen had a more impactful bench than we did in terms of ability to change the game. The likes of Guy and Morris were more impactful in changing the course of the game than any of our substitutes. That's the damning indictment, and we didn't use that sensibly. And when we had to come back into the game, we'd already taken off the difference makers, like especially Kuhn and Ida as well. The Forrest injury was, again, that was the third thing that was. The 3 big things went Aberdeen's way: Schmeichel throwing the ball into the net, Maeda missing a 1-on-1, and Forrest getting injured. Because he really was the one that looked like he could. He would either have the nous to kind of steer Celtic over the line at 1-0, or if we had to chase another goal, he was going to make the difference, breaking down their defence. So him going off was a terrible blow at that time. But again, what we didn't see on the day was that huge resource advantage I talked about. We did not see it on the pitch, and that's a strategic fail, I think, on behalf of not just the Celtic board but Rodgers as well, who's picked a lot of these players.
Yeah, with injuries to Hatate and Jota, some of the better options that would have been on the bench were pulled into the starting lineup, obviously, and therefore weren't able to come on later in the game and make a change. For anybody who doesn't know, the bench was Yang, McCowan, Schlupp, Kenny, Forrest, Trusty, Sinisalo and Ralston. So not a great number of game changers amongst them, and a point of weakness that I think we've had numerous times. James, unless you've got anything else specific you want to say about the game, obviously, I do want to talk a little bit about the penalties at the end, just because I do not subscribe to the old cliche that penalties are a lottery. I think the team with the better penalty takers usually wins a penalty shootout, or the team with the better goalkeeper saving penalties wins the penalty shootout. I have to admit, with Engels having been substituted off, I couldn't name amongst even all the other players who'd been gone off and our starting lineup, I couldn't name 5 people that I think would be good in a penalty shootout for us. I know that it probably goes more to a lottery once you get beyond that 5, I get that, but every team should have 5 strong penalty takers in it, and we don't, and it's something we've always struggled with. It's not a very popular thing that I say, but even Henrik Larsson wasn't fantastic at penalties to my memory. Again,
to work this out once, Laura. I think you were right. I think he was slightly below average, as in his average was less than 0.78, whatever the expected goal value of a penalty. I think he was slightly below that.
So, James, I guess the question to you then is, should that be a priority for us moving forward? Should we be training this more, or identifying players who are available who can do this? Because basically, without Engels, we don't have a penalty taker.
Yeah, I think that's way down on the priority list of things that we need to get our act together on. So in an ideal world,
fair,
particularly in preparation, I mean, I think, again, within the game plan of who was playing for penalties, if that is a base case of what your strategy is going into a game, which to me it seemed like it was for Aberdeen, then you would normally just humanly prepare more for penalties than your opposition probably would. And it sure as hell looked like that. So they, again, you can't, this is to the players' credit. I mean, you can prepare all you want, but to step up and top shelf penalty kicks like 3 of their players did.
Yeah, they were fantastic penalties.
I mean, that's Larsson, you name it, greatest players of all time have not been able to do that under pressure. So, so credit to the guys at Aberdeen that were able to do that. But they had what looked like, we talked about Schmeichel at length about the idea of him returning this season in particular, and how there was a risk given his age and the fact that he's not the most fit human being on the earth right now and hasn't been during his entire tenure at Celtic. Middle-aged guy, beer belly hero that he's been. There was a risk, I think a knowable risk, that there could be an issue with him. And I think it, manifested in this game to a degree. I'm not saying that he was ultimately the difference maker. I mean, it was a huge mistake, but I think given the state that he looks like he's in, looking like an old keeper coming off an injury who's not in the best of shape, they had a big advantage. I mean, Mitov played well in the game. This is not some aberration. He's been a good shot stopper throughout his time in the Scottish League. And it looks like they did some preparation on certain aspects of penalty taking. And again, credit to Harry Brady at Celtic Underground. They posted up something on their Substack with an interview at one point with a guy who's done research on this. So it's well worth a listen on their Substack, going through how do you prepare for, penalties. And it looked to me like they were better prepared. Now, again, to be charitable to Celtic and the staff, it's like, because to your point, Laura, I mean, I don't think anyone knew who the 5 players were going to be, other than you knew MacGregor was going to step up. And by the way, look at his history. He hasn't been great on penalties either.
Yeah, the only reason he was going to step up is because of the type of guy he is, not because he's a good penalty taker.
yeah, his track record, I mean, he was a primary penalty taker for a while, and they had to throw him off because he wasn't any good at it. So, I mean, this is not something that everyone can do well, even if they're preparing for it. So, yeah, I think Aberdeen looked like a team playing for penalties and then executed on it like a team that had really, really prepared for it and had, the makeup to kind of withstand the pressure and deliver under pressure, include their keeper and their penalty takers. I mean, it was a really good performance, and that was by far the highlight of their performance. I mean, they were like European world class penalty shootout. I mean, that was really, really good for them.
Yeah, it was a fascinating shootout, but we're at risk here of forgetting that 6 months ago we won a penalty shootout to win the League Cup. And it was and Celtics was a textbook example of how to win a shootout, right? Not only in the execution of the kicks, but also in Schmeichel's performance as the goalkeeper. I mean, Schmeichel gave an almost Ebi Martinez level of shithousery masterclass during that penalty shootout of owning the penalty area, owning the ball, getting in the forwards
he tried it
into
again,
the penalty
too.
takers.
Yep.
Right? He tried it again, but Don Robertson went out of his way to muzzle him. He went out of his way not to let him control the penalty. Celtic had all the advantages. It's very, very interesting, this. In the League Cup final, Celtic lost the toss for choice of end and lost the toss to take the first penalty. The first team taking a penalty in a shootout has a 60% chance of winning. So Celtic had the disadvantage in the League Cup final, and yet because, the 5 penalty takers, can you remember who they were? Ida, MacGregor, Engels, Hitati, and Maeda. And Maeda, guess what? He schlaffed his again, didn't he? I mean, he's not a good penalty. And the only 2 that took penalties that were in the Scottish Cup semi-final are MacGregor and Maeda, neither of whom demonstrably are good penalty takers. I mean, MacGregor's missed a few, and Maeda has sclaffed both of his, and both of them have gone in, fortunately. But nevertheless, on this occasion, we won the toss for choice of end. We won the toss to go first. 60%. We should have won that. We should have won that shootout, but we missed the first one because MacGregor's taken it. He's not a very good penalty taker. Don Robertson controls Schmeichel. Mitov, good goalkeeper, makes a couple of saves, and apart from Johnny Kenny, I don't think anyone else looked particularly comfortable. He seemed fine, but so it's very interesting. Very interesting. I guess what it goes to show is that the penalty takers are crucial. We only had 2 people out of 5 taking the same penalty as James says. We probably, we suspect that Schmeichel's been brought back. Is he 100%? I doubt he's 100%. And they've made a judgment that let's make up a number, a 95% fit, 90% fit Schmeichel is preferable to Sinisalo. I would argue that point. I really would. I think I did. Because I made the case, I think, a few weeks ago that Sinisalo should remain in situ. Let the old man recover. Let him get back in shape for that, and then let's have a really interesting debate. As we build up to that European Champions League qualifier. But
yeah, Alan, for anybody who doesn't remember, initial estimates of Schmeichel's return date for his injury was September, I think. So. Yeah. The idea that he was back playing a couple of weeks ago is crazy to me, and he certainly doesn't look entirely ready. I think the summer will be a decent chance for him to recuperate. So that was that with the Scottish Cup final as it was. Trebles are not easy to win, as we know. But what I want to ask you guys before the end of the show is, James, I'll come to you first. What's your overall thoughts on the season and how it's gone, and how much does the Scottish Cup final loss impact on that? Because I said in my tweet after it that it was a bitter way to end the season, but I thought it was overall a good season in terms of, yes, the league is poor, but we have managed to win it relatively easily. We got the League Cup. I thoroughly enjoyed our output in the Champions League. So for me, there was more positives than negatives, even though I do see a rebuild necessary over the summer. What was your thoughts on it?
I think on a results basis, I'd give it like a B plus, A minus. So good, solid season. On an underlying performance, I'd probably give it more of a C+. And I say that because I think and most of this is kind of downhill from the issues we have in recruitment, as Alan pointed out. The shambolic state of the final team on the pitch in a Scottish Cup final, who we had coming off the bench in Bayern at the Allianz. I mean, the recruitment remains a fundamental problem. And my column I wrote this week, came out Monday, was basically looking at, as I'm calling it, the barbell vulnerabilities that we had this season, and that teams that either were capable, meaning well coached, let's call it the Bruges, well coached and athletic, that pressed us in a coherent, high quality way, turned us into almost like putty. Like we almost looked like we were impotent. And then the teams that were well kind of structured and organized, playing the park the bus, which we did not see as much this season as we have. And that's kind of the thesis of my article, is because we were so bad in buildup and so vulnerable to press amongst certain teams of certain levels, that I think on the margin, some teams domestically thought, hey, let's go try that. And then if you're Aberdeen, let's go try that. That's different than if you're even young boys trying it, given the disparity in talent and athleticism. So if you park the bus against us and you did it well, we were also kind of impotent. So there was a lot of games, fortunately, that didn't happen. But having that level of impotence in kind of clear and obvious tactical ways, I think suggests really major squad problems and kind of how the team's built. And if we're going to move forward next season and kind of, combat some of the new emerging threats domestically, shall we say, that we'll cover a lot this summer, by the way, and progress in the Champions League with maybe a tougher draw this season, most likely. Fortunately, if we make it, hopefully, then I think we need to resolve that. We need to have a more balanced, coherent roster of a squad of players put together, so that we don't have these kind of massive vulnerabilities, kind of clear and obvious ways that we can, look so ineffectual.
I think that's all very fair. Alan, your thoughts overall on the season? I know you're not the type of person to be majorly affected by the outcome of one game, i.e. the cup final, and have it stain your view of the season overall. What was your thoughts? I pretty much agree with what James has said there. I do think that even though we won the league at a canter, there were signs from probably New Year onwards that the team was not all it was cracked up to be, and that we were perhaps papering over cracks. But what was your thoughts overall?
So, I mean, just on the cup final, by the way, if you remember last week, I was asking the question, I think it was on the Thursday maybe, as to, what was the worst team that Celtic have ever lost to in a Scottish Cup final. So in the spirit of, if you want something done, do it yourself, the answer is, this was the worst team we've ever lost to in a Scottish Cup final. Aberdeen, we were 39 points ahead of Aberdeen. The next lowest team in terms of number of points that we've been below Celtic who've beaten us in the Scottish Cup final was actually Aberdeen in the 1969-70 final, which is well remembered for some Don Robertson-esque refereeing. So this is actually arguably. There was a season like in the 1890s when Celtic lost to Queen's Park, but Queen's Park, I think, because the league was professional, weren't in the league. But by any objective measure, Queen's Park were one of the giants of world football at that time, so that wasn't really a great shock. We've lost to teams that are 8 places below us before, but never teams that have been that many points behind us in the final table. So statistically, on that basis, this is our worst ever cup final defeat. So I can't be happy about that. But I agree with what James said. I agree with what you said. You can't define the whole season by. I have to take a step back. I'm just slightly, not massively, slightly more optimistic than James on the the standard of the opposition that we played in the Champions League, I think we did a pretty good job getting out. I think that's objective, mate. I think it's a big green tick on that campaign for me. I think we forget the league was won at a canter, and the reason it was won at a canter was because of absolutely spirit-crushing consistency by Celtic if you're one of the opposition teams for month after month, game after game, Wednesday, Saturday, or whatever it was, for many months to win and earn that league. So I think that's a big tick. I'm not happy about that we did get to grips in the derby matches, because, again, that's the sort of Jimmy Tulane thing of when are you going to learn? When are you going to try something different? What you're doing clearly isn't working. What are you going to do about it? And I didn't see that from Rodgers in the derby matches. I think he persisted with the we've got the better players, we're a better team, we will prevail type of attitude, which is what I think James rightly rails against. So I think that's one. And I'm just really worried about the squad. I've been whinging about squad management forever. There's too many places taken up by players that are, that are on a wage that we should be giving to somebody else that's going to contribute more. So this is as much about getting rid of players as it is about recruiting. And I've been saying this for a number of summers now, and that hasn't changed. Last thing from me is that we are carrying on during the summer. So people that are listening in, don't, subscribers, what have you, we will continue. We may have a bit more of a rolling personnel because people will be having holidays and so forth, but we'll be endeavouring to have 2 podcasts a week. Some of the regular features, obviously, like the stat packs and the Yorkshire Whistler, will obviously not be there because there's no games, but they'll be replaced by James and I probably writing more analysis pieces because we've got the time to do that. So if anything, there'll be more content. There's a number of specials that we've got planned as we've had the interview series that will continue. So the summer is going to be full of stuff. So please stick with us. It'll be great to have you along as all of these risks and issues that we've identified play out over the summer months.
Yeah, I've had to have my holidays signed off by management and make sure that at least 2 of us are here so that I can take my holidays. That's what happens when you get on board a professional podcast outfit like the Huddle Breakdown. Alan, James, thank you very much for joining me. Not the kind of conversation we wanted to have after the Scottish Cup final, but certainly an entertaining one and an interesting one for everybody to listen to and watch. I think, as Alan said, the content will keep coming over the summer. So please, if you haven't already, consider subscribing at huddlebreakdown.com. We really appreciate all your support over this season. I think I speak for myself and James and Alan when I say thank you very much for joining us this season. Please don't make this the last show that you listen to, because the content will keep coming over the summer and we will be back again next season. Whether some of the players in Celtic squad are there or not, we will be there until time immemorial. James, Alan, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you again very, very soon.